Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Ayin Tet. Today's daf is sponsored by Amy Goldstein in loving memory of her grandfather, Ben Goldstein, on his Yurtzeit. Okay, there's a study guide for today, which will help. I want to remind you we're in the middle of a Mishnah, and the Mishnah talks about nitkaven laharog. Oh, and before we start, by the way, hopefully should be for sure. Alana Steinhain's Shiur should go up today about Rodef. So I know it's a little delayed, but she was also out of town with me. We were at a conference together. And but the Deem Rodef is, as we know, a super interesting law, and that will go up later today. So recommended listening. Okay, we're now up to another interesting topic about the place of intent in your actions when it comes to getting the death penalty. Again, in terms of murder cases, what kind of intent is needed? So we saw in the Mishnah, we started learning, if you intend to kill an animal and instead you kill a person, or you intend to kill a gentile, which you're not liable to the death penalty, and instead you kill a Jew, or you intend to kill, etc. So we went through a bunch of cases, or you intended a blow that was not a death blow, and then instead of going on the hips, it ended up going on, or the loins, it ended up going on the heart and killed the person, because obviously it's kill someone, you hit someone in the heart, a lighter blow could actually kill, but you weren't intending a blow of death, so you're not liable. Now we're going to start with the last four words of the daf. Nitkaven lahakoto alibo an ayin cherem abed. You intended to hit someone on the heart, v'hayaba kedei lahamit alibo, and it was a blow that could have killed someone. So you were about to hit a really hard punch into the heart where you could actually have killed the person. V'ha'chala motnav, but in the end, it actually went to the person's loins. And it wasn't the kind of blow that if you hit the person where you hit the person, they should have died from it. And yet, vamet, but they did die from it, well, they did die. That's the thing. We're going to say, since it wasn't a blow of death, even though, remember, you were heading to kill. So you had a blow of death, but you missed your spot. You hit somewhere else. It shouldn't have killed the person, but in the end, they die. We can't hold you liable either for that. Patur. Because the blow that you dealt in the end to the loins was not a blow that was going to actually, should have been a blow that should have killed the person. And therefore, even though you intended, this is a very radical opinion, really, even though we're going to see much more radical than this, but that's how much intent you need. You didn't, in the end, have a blow that should have killed. So if it did, we assume maybe something else caused the death, even though it's hard to say that, but that's what we say. Similarly, Nitzkaven lahakot et hagadol v'lo hayaba. This is similar to the first case we saw of the motnaim. You intended to hit a grown person. Now, kill a grown person is much harder than to kill a child, because again, child is a more sensitive, could be killed more easily. So you intended to hit someone who was, and it's the same comparison between the loins and the heart. The heart is an easier place to kill someone. So nitkabel laroget hagadol v'lo hayaba kedei la'amit et hagadol. But the blow was not enough to kill someone who was already grown. But instead, accidentally, you ended up hitting that same blow to a minor. And to a minor, that blow is a death blow. It was a death blow that could have killed the minor, and it did. Vamet patur. Again, you're exempt because you weren't intending a death blow. So you intended to hit a minor, and it was enough to actually kill a minor, the blow you were intending. But instead, but in the end, right, you ended up hitting a bigger person, right? You can imagine the bigger person, you kind of, came right in to block the hit on the child. And there wasn't a blow that could really kill a grown person. Vamet, but in the end, the person did die, patur, because it obviously must not have been your doing that caused the person's death. Because again, you weren't doing a blow that could have killed. It doesn't really talk here about how we assess what's a blow that could kill and what's a blow that couldn't kill, and how, we didn't really discuss that. Well, I read a book recently where there was this case where they were accusing this child of killing someone, and in the end, they found out later that the person had a previous health condition, and it wasn't a blow that could have killed, and the kid died because of some other reason. So, it's definitely likely that there's other factors that could cause someone's death. Aval nitkaven, now here we get to the aval. But what if, the only one we haven't discussed yet, right? We've discussed a lot of permutations. Nitkaven la'akot ha'motnav v'haya ba kadei la'amit ha'motnav. Now, what if you go to kill someone in the loins with a big, serious blow? But instead you missed and you hit the heart, which is even easier to kill the person in his heart. Vamate, and the person dies. Chayav. Well, then you're going to be obligated, because what's the difference if you intended to kill the person by punching them in one part of their body and you punch them instead somewhere else in their body? So obviously then you're going to be chayav. And likewise, if you're going to give a very serious blow that you were intending to hit a big person, and instead ended up on a minor, which obviously could kill that person, vamet chayav. Okay, then you're going to be obligated. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Okay, that's all the Tanakhama's opinion. Comes Rabbi Shimon at the end of the Mishnah and says, "Afilu nitkaven la'arog et zeh v'arag et zeh patur." Even if you intended to kill a particular Jew and you then killed a different Jew, you're going to be patur. Okay, you're going to be exempt. So now the Gemara is going to ask immediately, to which case is he referring in his debate here? Rabbi Shimon Ahaya, where is he relating to? Ilema Seifa, if you think, right, you might, the logic would say, right, we just said the Gadol and the Katan, and he's referring to that. But the language doesn't really fit, because it should say Rabbi Shimon Poter Mebaile. He shouldn't have said Afilu nitkaven la'arog et zeh v'arag et zeh patur. He should have just said, right, the previous was, if you started with the Gadol and hit the Katan v'made chayav, and we'd say Rabbi Shimon Poter, Rabbi Shimon exempts in that case. So it must be he's referring to earlier in the Mishnah. Ela aresha. And that's why he worded it in that way, because in the Reisha it said nitkaven la'arog et habeima v'arag et ha'adam. Love kochavim v'arag et Yisrael, and nifalim v'arag ben kayama patur. And from there, now the rabbis didn't discuss what if you intend to kill one Jew and instead you killed a different Jew. But it's obvious from what they say, Hanit kaven laharog et zeh v'arag et zeh chayav, right? If they say you intended for an animal and you killed a person, or you intended for a gentile and you killed a Jew, or you intended for a non-viable child and you killed a viable child. So if you're exempt in all those cases, obviously the rabbis think, though, that if you intended to kill a full-fledged Jew, right, a person who was going to live and all that, and you killed a different person, obviously you're going to be obligated. And on that point, Rabbi Shimon comes and says, no, no, no. You're only obligated. He requires so much intent that you have to have intended that particular person. Okay, so if I intended to kill one person, and instead I killed the person next to them because I had bad aim, I'm exempt. Okay? So that's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. We're going to have to deal with this and try to understand Rabbi Shimon's opinion and try to explain on what they debate, how they explain Psukim. We're going to deal with this for the next while. So, Pshita. So now the Gemara is going to say, this case that we're going to explain right now, it's obvious they disagree about. Kai, Reuven, Shimon. You have two people standing there, Reuven and Shimon. Va'amal, and the murderer says, Ana leReuven kamachavne. I'm aiming to kill Reuven. LeShimon lo kamachavne. I'm not trying to kill Shimon. Hainu plugtayu. That definitely they have an argument about. Okay, there's no doubts about that. It's very clear that's the classic case here of I tried to kill one person, I killed someone else instead. Amar lechad mina yumai. What if, okay, unfortunately in America there's these shootings, right? People go into a mall, they just start randomly shooting. So what if you just say, I don't care, I'll kill any one of them without any particular intent to kill this person or that person? So what would be the case then? Because Rabbi Shimon sounds like you need intent to kill that particular person, and you don't have intent to kill that particular person. So would Rabbi Shimon exempt you in that case? To which they say, right, or inami, another question. What about kasavur Reuven v'nimtza Shimon? What if you see the person from afar and you think it's Reuven and you want to kill Reuven, and in the end you mistake their identity and it turns out it was Shimon? So now here it's tricky. You were intending for that body, right? And you hit that body. It's not like you missed, but you were wrong about who it was. Do you need that kind of intent for Rabbi Shimon to be liable? Now remember, I want to be clear. Nobody thinks it's okay for you to do this. Okay, this is clearly wrong. But again, going back to what we've been discussing over and over and over, in order to get the death penalty, we might be very strict with you. And Rabbi Shimon is very strict in terms of the need for serious intent. Okay, how much intent is needed? That's our question. Okay, just shooting randomly to people, are you not liable? Or mixing up the identity of people. I was thinking about, assassination. Sometimes that happens, targeted assassinations. They get the wrong guy, right? That's a good case. If they thought it was one person, it turns out it was somebody else. So Tashma, let's learn from here. Did Tanya, as it says in a Braita, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ad Shiomar Leploni Ani Mitkaven. Yeah, really, you're not going to be obligated. You have to intend specifically to kill this person and be right about their identity and be, and not just randomly shooting in order to get the death penalty, which really comes out crazy. You think about those people who shoot in malls and random shootings. According to them, you wouldn't be obligated because you're not intending for a particular person. You're just randomly shooting. And you wouldn't be obligated the death penalty, which, right, you think about those were the cases where you think all the more so you'd be obligated the death penalty because they're really crazy killings. Anyway, that's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Okay, the rabbis obviously disagree and think that as soon as you intend to kill a person, it doesn't matter, right? That a Jewish person who you're liable to the death penalty, it doesn't matter who you kill in the end. So now we're going to see where Rabbi Shimon gets it from. My time of Rabbi Shimon, Amar Kra. Okay, there's two sections that talk about, really get into the details of murder. They're really the focus of these two chapters, both in Bamidbar 35 and Devraim 19. The focus is really Rotzeach B'Shgaga. We're going to learn these psukim very well when we get to Makot and we learn about who goes to the Ir Miklat, the refuge city, for accidental murders. But when they're talking about accidental murders, they compare to real murder, intentional murder. Because in order to understand what accidental murder is, you have to compare it to intentional murder. So they say, the pasuk says, Amakra, we'll start from the beginning of the pasuk. It's Devraim chapter 19, verse 11. By the way, you can look at the study guide now. It has the psukim there. If somebody hates his friend, which again doesn't really mean his friend, but a fellow Jew, and he ambushes him and stands up against him, and kills him a death blow, and he dies. Okay, and then they go through what's supposed to happen. They go to the Ir Miklat, but then they have to be judged, and they judge whether this was intentional or unintentional, and then that determines whether you're going to get the death penalty or you're going to stay in the refuge city. But it's clear here that we're talking about this is intentional murder. So what words are unnecessary in the pasuk? Well, you could have just said if a person hates someone, even the hate part is interesting. Why they even have to mention that? That's not our focus today. And you could have said v'ikau nefesh v'meit, and you kill him a death blow. Why does it say v'arav lo v'kamalav? You ambushed him and stood up against him. So comes Rabbi Shimon and he says, yeah, v'arav lo v'kamalav, ad she'itkaven lo. That seems to add clear intent. And notice it says arav lo. You ambushed him, this person, okay? Meaning very, very specifically to this person. V'Rabbanan. What are the rabbis going to do with those words? Okay, so now we're going to get off on a tangent because we're going to go explain these words about something else. Similar, but something else. For Rabbanan, Amri debei Rabbi Yanai, prat lezorek even lego. That comes to exclude, which we're not going to yet understand exactly what this means, somebody who throws a stone into a group of people. Now, throws a stone and kills, and we're assuming threw a stone that could have killed. So that's weird. According to what we understood of the rabbis, that case should be actually obligated. But it's coming to say, no. Arav lo v'kamalav. There has to be some sort of intent, okay, that if you throw a rock into a group of people and kill one of them, you're not obligated. Okay, what kind of group are we talking about? It's obvious that we must be talking about a group since the rabbis say, what if you intended a Gentile and killed a Jew? Okay, so remember, if you intended a Gentile, you're not obligated. What if you throw into a group of Gentiles and Jews together and to kill one of them? Now, there's Jews and there's Gentiles. So now, maybe that's the case. So now the Gemara has to say, well, Hechidami, what was the makeup of this group? How many Jews, how many Gentiles? And from here, we're going to get to a very famous sugya about laws of majority. Hechidami, this is going to sound like the 9 stores with the kosher meat and the non-kosher meat. Okay, so very famous sugya that comes up over and over again. So now we say the following. If there were 9 Gentiles, I have kutim, I'm sure some of the different Gemaras have different words. So, right, we keep seeing that where it could be avdei kochavim, it could be goyim, nechuim. There's all different words that sometimes appear here. But there's 9 Gentiles, ve'echad Yisrael beinehem, and there's 1 Jew. If there's 9 Gentiles and 1 Jew, we know already, laws of majority, right? Typically, deruba kutim ninu. the majority are kutim, and obviously you're not going to therefore be obligated because again, that would be a classic case since we go by majority. An obvious case where Gentiles, it's like intending for a Gentile, then you killed a Jew. Inami, and even palgo palga, if it's 50-50, okay? If it's 50-50, what do we say? Well, we don't have rove, we don't have a majority, but we have 50-50. We don't know what you intended, either that or that. And therefore, since this is a matter of the death penalty, safek nefashot lahakel, we have a principle that we're always going to be lenient when it comes to a doubt about a death, right? Killing somebody. So for sure, if it was 50-50 even, we're not going to kill you. Now, lo tzricha, so what must be the case? Where he said again that this is what the rabbis darshan from arav lo v'kamalav, that it excludes, it exempts you. You're not going to be obligated if you throw a stone into a group of people. Lo tzricha di'ika tish'a Yisrael v'kuti echad. Now, 9 Jews and 1 Gentile. Okay, again, kuti, or maybe, probably likely, mine just changed it to kuti, but it really means Gentile. Remember this? There's 2 ways of dealing with majority, and it depends if it's fixed or if it was taken out of its place. If this was with the meat in the stores, right? If we have a piece of meat that's in the middle of these stores, it was taken out, we say it came out from, we rule by majority. We go by a statistical majority. We see what the majority of the stores are, and we go by the majority. But if it's that you went into a store, we look at it as, which store did you go into? Was it kosher or non-kosher? Even if there were 9 kosher stores and 1 not kosher, the suffix becomes, since it's fixed in its place, okay, why this is, there's different explanations, and nobody really knows why this is, okay? Everybody gives a certain theory about it, but the idea is if you go into one of these stores, we view it as if it's not a statistical majority, we view it as, is it this or is it that, okay? We view it as 50-50. So in this case, if you throw into a group and they're standing, they're fixed in their place, and there's a group of 9 Jews and 1 Gentile, we basically look at it as, did you intend, right? Was it Jew or Gentile? 50-50. Okay. And then once it's 50-50, that goes back to saying, well, safek nefashot lahakel. Okay. We don't know. We're not going to rule, when it's a 50-50 safek, we're not going to rule strictly and have you killed. And that's what the rabbis learned from that case. So even though the rabbis say, if you intended to kill a person, you're going to be liable, in a case where you threw it into a group and the majority, even if there was a minority of Gentiles, if they're standing in one place, right? If one stepped out of the group and you hit that person, then, and we don't know what you intended, then we go by majority, okay? Statistical majority. But in the case where they're standing and you threw it into this group, we're going to say it's a 50-50 chance, and therefore we're going to rule leniently. And that's what the rabbis learned from that pasuk. How did we get here? Because it's not really it's somewhat our topic, but it's really not. Like laws of rove that relate to it. But it's because they understood the pasuk, va'arav lo v'kamalav, to be teaching you that halacha. And by the way, just to be clear, that's the source for kol kavua kemechzal mechzadame. And what they're saying is v'kam lo va'arav alav is saying, if it's not clear, if there's a suffix here, and what kind of suffix? A suffix that we wouldn't learn from somewhere else in the Torah, right? We learn 9 Gentiles and 1 Jew. Of course, we learn it, that you would be obligated. That we learn from Dinei Rov, Acharei Rabim La'atot. And even 50-50 we would learn. But the fact that Kol Kavua is looked at as Mechzal Mechzeh, that 9 Jews and 1 Gentile, you still would be exempt, that is learned from here. And that applies then from here to all other cases of Kol Kavua as looked at as 50-50 suffix. Now we're going to have another problem. And before we start reading inside, I'm going to read you the pasuk. Again, you should have it on your sheet. Shmot.21, verse 22. Ki yinatsu anashim. We have 2 people fighting. V'nagfu isha hara. And they kill a pregnant woman. You can already start thinking about where the Gemara is going to go with this. Because what were they intending? Well, there's actually a debate about whether they were fighting to kill or they were just fighting. But let's assume, we're going to see the first opinion here is Rabbi Elazar, who says, B'matzut sheb'mita katuv b'daber. Matzut is from yinatsu. The fight that they're having is a fight to the death, okay, like a duel, you might imagine. Okay, they're having a duel, and a pregnant woman comes in the middle of the situation. V'yatzu yeladeha. Now she's pregnant. If from the blow that she gets by getting involved in the middle of these 2 men, if she loses the baby, V'lo yiyaso, meaning she doesn't die. Anoshi anesh kasher yashita la bala isha. We put the husband of that woman will make them pay. V'natan biflilim. Remember these words, v'natan biflilim. We're going to come back to them, which clearly means they pay money. Okay, the person who killed her has to pay money. V'im ason yihiyeh. But if a tragedy happens, meaning obviously it's a tragedy if she loses her baby, but what we're talking about here, okay, going back to right the road if we're talking about the baby before the baby's born, they're not considered the same as the value of her life. If she's alive, im ason yihiyeh v'natatan nefesh tachat nefesh. Okay, but if she is killed, then okay, the simple reading of this, and I say the simple reading because we're going to see some other explanations. We give a soul for a soul, the person gets killed. Now, what's the problem here? Did they intend to kill her? No. So this is not going to work out according to Rabbi Shimon, because according to this, they get whoever kills her gets the death penalty, even though they clearly weren't intending to kill this woman. So the rabbis who say if you intend to kill one Jew and you killed a different Jew, you're going to be liable. Well, this works perfectly. Dichtiv ki yinatzu anashim v'nagfu isha hara. And that makes perfect sense. But Amar Rabbi Elazar, let's just keep going and explaining. B'matzut sheb'mita katuv medabel. It must be talking about they were trying to kill each other, and they accidentally killed her. Dichtiv imason yevenatatan nefesh tachat nafesh. And then it works perfectly because here you see they didn't intend to kill her; they intended to kill someone else, and you're liable. That's the rabbis. Rabbi Shimon, but according to Rabbi Shimon, how's Rabbi Shimon going to explain that pasuk? You ready for this? Mammon. Nefesh tachat nafesh doesn't mean nefesh tachat nafesh, just like ayin tachat ayin, eye for an eye, doesn't mean eye for an eye. Eye for an eye means money. Soul for a soul means money. Very radical interpretation. Wait till we get to an even third, more radical interpretation if you thought this was radical. Okay, now, uchi de Rebbi. Now, we're not just making this up, that must be what Rabbi Shimon says, but it actually accords with Rebbi's opinion. As we see in a Braita, Titania, Rebbi Omer, v'natatan nefesh tachat nafesh, mamon. Okay, here's your classic Midrash Halacha. It takes a pasuk and interprets it in a particular way, and then goes back and says, do you really mean that? Right? Even though we know they mean that. Right? Because the simple reading does seem to be actually killing the person. So now they say, do you really mean money and not that we kill the person? So how do we know that what they want to prove now? How do we know that when it says v'natatan nefesh tachat nafesh, it really means money? Well, ne'emra netina lemata v'ne'emra netina lemala. Well, in the first pasuk it said v'natan biflilim. I told you we get back to this. Okay, we're now turning to Amud Bet. And in the next pasuk it says v'natata nefesh tachat nefesh. No, notice natan and natata. That's the same word, right? To give. You give b'plilim and you give nefesh tachat nefesh. By the way, the word give, right? Natata nefesh tachat nefesh. You wouldn't necessarily say you give. To give more sounds like to give money. So malahalan mamon afkan mamon. So just like the nitina in the first pasuk is money, also in the second pasuk it's also money. Now again, the simple reading of the pasuk does not seem this way because it seems to be contrasting. If there's no ason because you didn't kill the woman, then you pay money. If you did kill the woman, then it's death. But this is saying no, they're both money. Okay? And that's a very radical interpretation. It's certainly not the simple reading, but it makes sense if you're of Rabbi Shimon's mindset. If you think, this is like when we have a pasuk that doesn't seem to accord with what we think should be the truth, like ayin tachan ayin. We don't believe that you should pull out an eye for an eye. The rabbis didn't think that was the appropriate way to go. So they interpret the pasuk to fit in with what they believe to be the truth, right? And what's right. And Rabbi Shimon really believed that if you don't intend to kill that particular person, you're not liable. And he learned it from another pasuk, right? So he was so convinced by that it allowed him to interpret this pasuk in some other way. Now, so let's just summarize. You intend to kill one person, you kill someone else. If we take the combination of the psukim that we saw, we have two approaches. And what we saw, not just the psukim, but what we derive from the psukim, there's two ways to look at it. One is to say you intend to kill one person, you kill someone else. Since you intended to kill, we're going to give you the death penalty. The other opinion, Rabbi Shimon, is to say if you intend to kill one person, you killed someone else, we're not going to give you the death penalty, but you do have to pay money. Okay? However, comes Rava and says, we're now going to see a third opinion. Okay, what's left? Think about it. We're going to see, I'll already tell you. If you intend to kill one person and you kill someone else, no death penalty and no monetary payment. Nothing. Okay, and this is going to be a really radical opinion because, right, you're kind of getting off scot-free. We're going to try to understand where he gets this from. I'm a Rava. So Rava comes and says the following. Hi, Ditana de Chizkia, this brighter that we have from the house of Chizkia, mafkami de Rebbi mafkami de Rabbanan. By the way, we learned this in Bava Kama, we learned this in Ketubot, we've seen this a few times, but you might not remember it. This opinion of Chizkia is excluded from Rebbi and excluded from the rabbis, meaning this is the third opinion, okay? Which neither of them hold by. Ditana de Chizkia says in the brights of Chizkia, Makeh Adam umakeh behema. We're now darshaning a pasuk by Yikra Kaf Daled, pasuk Kaf Aleph. Makeh behema yishamena umakeh Adam yumat. Okay, you hit an animal, you pay damages. You hit a person, you get killed. Some people think this pasuk, we're going to see it another time, is actually talking about Makeh Adam is, we're going to see it on Daf Pei Daled already, not so coming up soon. And the Nechnakim, that this pasuk, Makeh Adam, what kind of hitting a person gets you the death penalty? If you hit your parents. Okay? But hitting in the Torah also sometimes means hit to kill. We saw that before. So this pasuk, right now, they're interpreting it that makeh behema, and you kill an animal, you pay money, but you kill a person, you get the death penalty. Okay, that seems like a pretty reasonable pasuk, teaching a basic halacha, but no, we don't need that pasuk to teach a basic halacha, because in other places in the Torah, it tells you that if you hit an animal and kill an animal, you have to pay damages. And other pasukim in the Torah tell you if you kill a person, you get the death penalty. This isn't the main pasuk. So this pasuk is totally unnecessary. Comes Chizkia, and Chizkia says we're obviously making a comparison between killing an animal and killing a person. And we're going to say that even though one you pay and one you get the death penalty, this is actually teaching you something else about the comparison between them. Okay, so what is it? Ma makeh behema lo chilakta ba bein shogeg lemezid bein mitkaven l'she'en mitkaven. Okay, I'll stop here for a second. When you kill an animal, this goes back to Adam u'ad la'olam. A person causes damage to someone else's property, i.e. their animal, right? Plus other things as well. But we learned Adam u'ad la'olam, bein b'shogeg, bein mizid, bein ba'ones, bein b'ratzon, right? No matter what, whether you were intentional about it or not intentional, it happened accidentally, or whether you intended or you didn't intend it. We're going to have to define what is intended, didn't intend. Usually that's shogeg mezid. Sounds like they're saying the same thing. So we'll get back to that. And bein derech yirida derech aliyah, it doesn't matter if you hit them where something was going downward or going upward, like you threw a rock in the air and hit them out going upward direction. This upward, downward direction, it's kind of a promo to, or a foreshadowing, one could say, for what we're going to talk about when we get to Ir Miklat, which is to go to a refuge city. If you kill someone accidentally, you're only going to have to go to the refuge city if it was derech yirida. And if it was on the way down, not on the way up, we'll get to that all when we get to Makot. But it's not really relevant here. It's relevant in the murder case. That's why they're bringing it. Okay, it has no relevance whatsoever for hitting an animal. So this part doesn't really belong here. It belongs here because of the second part of this sentence. So anyway, there's no difference. Lepotro mamon. In other words, doesn't matter shogeg mezid mitkaven edo mitkaven derech yirida derech aliyah to exempt someone from payment, meaning ela lechayvo mamon. In other words, you're not going to be exempt because you say, "Oh, it was an accident." That's not going to get you an exemption. No matter what, you're going to be obligated. Well, likewise, now, af makeh adam. Now, let's just think for a minute where we're going. This is going to lead us into kimle b'derive, which means what? When you kill a person, what we're going to say here is, okay, let's just go with intentionally kill, and you get the death penalty. And let's say you cause damage along the way, monetary damage, you're exempt because of kimle b'derive. If in one action you incur both death penalty and payment, we're going to always go by the more severe, and you're not going to have to pay money. So, af makeh adam, when we have this principle of kimle b'derive, and this is Chizkia's big chiddush, because kimle b'derive is not a chiddush, but I mean it is at some point, but it's not learned from here. But lo tachloch bo ben shogeg lemezid. Now, you don't always get the death penalty. If you're shogeg, you don't get the death penalty, and you might have thought, because you don't get the death penalty, you might have to pay money. But now we're going to say, just like in the makeh behema, no matter what, you are obligated to pay money. We're going to basically say, In any case where there's a murder, it doesn't matter if it was intentional, non-intentional, with, right, all those, bein shogeg, bein b'yisid, bein mitkaven l'she'ein mitkaven, bein derech yirida l'derech aliyah, l'chayvo mamon, ela lepatro mamon. We're also not going to distinguish, and just like in some of the cases, you're never obligated to pay money, in all the cases, you're not obligated to pay money. So if you remember, we talked about kimle before, in the sense that if you murder someone and there's not, let's say there's no witnesses, or there's not enough witnesses, or there's something missing, or you weren't warned before, but we have witnesses that you did it, you're still going to be exempt from paying the money, even though you're not getting the death penalty. And here we're going even farther. If you were not mitkaven, which you don't get the death penalty. Now the question is, what is not mitkaven? So we're going to basically show that you're exempt from paying money here. Okay, because you did something that potentially could have gotten you the death penalty, even though it doesn't in this case. Okay, and what's that going to be? So what's mitkaven b'she'eino mitkaven? So my she'ein mitkaven, what does it mean you didn't intend? Ilay ma she'ein mitkaven klal, if it means you didn't intend to kill it all, hainu shogeg. That's shogeg, right? You were chopping trees in the forest, and your thing flies out, and you kill someone I wasn't intending to kill. Well, that's shogeg. That's mentioned in the first phrase. So that can't be ein mitkaven, can't be I had no intent to kill, which you would have thought that would be the obvious what ein mitkaven is. So they say, no. Must it be? Ela pshita she'ein mitkaven lezeh ela lezeh. So they prove that Chizkia must be referring to our case when he says ein mitkaven. Ein mitkaven means you intended to kill, but you intended to kill this person and not that person. And what do you see here? Well, first of all, you see you don't have to pay. Okay. V'katane l'chayvo mamon. Ela lipatro mamon, and it says, right, you're not going to be obligated to pay money. You're exempt from money. So that already disagrees with Rabbi Shimon, right? Because it says you're exempt from paying money. And how do we know you're exempt from the death penalty? Because maybe it means you're obligated to the death penalty. Well, and then maybe it's the rabbi's position. Because remember what Rabbi said, this doesn't accord with the rabbi's position, not with Rebbi's position. Ibar katlu, if you're liable to death penalty, well, you wouldn't need a special pasuk to teach you, my itzrich lemiftere mamon. You wouldn't need a special pasuk to teach you. You don't have to pay money, because that's the basic law of kim levi derabim minei, which we learn from different pasukim. So right there happens to be a bunch of pasukim that we derive it from, really kedei rishato, only one risha, not two. Okay, that's one of the reasons. Anyway, the point is you don't need this pasuk to teach you that if you get the death penalty, you're not going to have to pay money, because we know that otherwise. So therefore, elalav shmamina, from here they conclude, Rava concludes, la bar katluhu v'la bar mamonuhu, that according to the Tana de Chizkia, this pasuk is coming to teach you, comparing the animal to humans, to say if you hit an animal and you kill an animal, no matter what, you're going to be obligated money. And if you kill a person, no matter what, it doesn't matter if you intended this person and killed a different person, you're not only not going to be liable to the death penalty in that case, but you're also not going to be liable to pay money. And there we have now three opinions. If you intend to kill one person and kill another, the rabbis say you're obligated to the death penalty. Rabbi Shimon says you're not obligated to death penalty. And Natata nefesh tacha nefesh means not the simple reading, but it means money. And now we have this third opinion, Tana de Chizkia, that you're not obligated money, you're not obligated to death penalty. The obvious question the Gemara doesn't relate to is, what does Chizkia do with the pasuk Natata nefesh tacha nefesh? At least Rabbi Shimon explains it in a way that's not really the simple reading. We thought that was radical enough to say it means money. How are they going to explain that pasuk? So the Yavrama and the Rama and the Yavrama and the Iri explain that they must understand that pasuk, even though it's a very unique explanation of that pasuk, that these two men are fighting. A pregnant woman comes in the middle, and one of them intentionally kills her. And that's why he gets the death penalty. Okay? It would have to be intentional, otherwise it doesn't make any sense, which is hard to explain if that's what the story is, but that's a possible explanation of what they do with nefesh tacha nefesh, which the Gemara doesn't really address. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next Mishnah, which is going to be a very unclear Mishnah. And we're going to have three interpretations, only two of them today, and try to understand what this means. Rotzeach shenitarev ba'acherim, kulam pturim. So Rotzeach, who gets mixed up with other Rotzchim. Okay, by the way, I see, Julie, you're writing that when I know you started your daf journey here and already had a question immediately, which is, you were saying that 7.5 years ago, you had this question that this doesn't make for a good society. Now, I want to explain something, which is we're going to get to soon this issue of kippah. Okay, we're going to actually mention it here. It's actually a very difficult thing to get. But there are cases when there's not sufficient evidence to convict and there's not sufficient evidence to kill, that we don't kill in the court, but we kill you by putting you in a kippah. And they try to get around this by finding other solutions. Not like they think this person is totally goes scot-free, even though it sounds that way. But yet the Mishnah already has this concept of sometimes we can't convict in a court, but we can do something else. Okay? It's a fascinating topic in and of itself, hard to swallow, particularly in times like this about putting people in narrow spaces and leaving them to die. It's a very hard topic to discuss. But we're going to get there on Shabbos stuff, but that's sort of the solution to your question, which is sometimes they can't do it through the courts, so they do it some other way. And in fact, Gefet this week is going to be about that concept of this kippah. What is it exactly? Is it like a fifth mitat beit din? We view it like that, or is it some like out of this, kind of beyond halacha realm of, maybe some commentaries say it's halacha l'moshe Sinai. It's some like tradition of something alternative. Anyway, it's a very interesting sugya and kind of complicated, but it does resolve this issue of, people who should be punished somehow need to get punished. And the kippah comes up in this sugya as well. We're going to discuss it much more, though, on the Shabbat daf. Now we start getting into, we were talking about rov a little before, now we're getting into what we call ta'arovot, right? Like usually it's kashrus, your milk drops into your chillent, or you have, something, one non-kosher thing mixed up with a bunch of kosher things, and you don't know now which is the kosher, which is the non-kosher. So we have like a bunch of pieces of meat, and we're not sure. So a murderer who is mixed up with others, now we don't know what others are, we're going to have to figure out later, they're all exempt. Okay, since we don't know which is the murderer, right? Like we had someone who we convicted, but now they look like all the rest of these people. We can't identify them. Or we don't remember which was the one. They're all exempt. Okay, so we don't really know what this is talking about. In another minute, it's going to get even more complicated because it sounds like it's a murderer mixed up with a lot of innocent people, who aren't murderers. Rabbi Yehuda Omer konsimo tam lekippah. Rabbi Yehuda says, well, we don't know which is the murderer. We put them all into this kippah, which is going to be, we're going to talk, it's a narrow space. And we feed them, usually in a kippah, you feed them like this food that makes their stomach explode and they eventually die. Well, that's crazy. What they're mixed up with all these innocent people. We put them all in a kippah. That really makes no sense. So don't worry, we're going to try to come up with explanations here. Kol chayvei mitot shenit'arvu ze bazeh nidonim bakala. All chayvei mitot that get mixed up with each other. Okay, if you have like people who are supposed to get skila mixed up with people who are supposed to get chenek, what do? Nidonim bakala. They get the lighter punishment. Right? Because we're always lenient when it comes to death penalty, right? Dead to kill it. Niskalim benisrafim. Now we're going to get back to, obviously, Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis and their big machloket about which is more severe than the other. So if you have people who are stoned mixed up in a group of people who are supposed to get burned, now usually, and I'm telling you this because we're going to get to this later, not today, but it sounds like the Mishnah is saying, when it says niskalim bin nisrafim, what we imagine is a big group of nisrafim, those who were supposed to get burned, and a few, the minority, are niskalim. Okay? Rabbi Shimon Omer nidonim b'skila. They get skila. Why? Shasreifa chamura, because sreifa is more severe. V'chachamim omrim nidonim b'sreifa shaskila chamura. Okay, once you have them mixed up, according to the simple reading of the Mishnah, it doesn't matter majority, not majority. But what seems to matter is which is more severe, which is less severe, and we have this machloket is streifa or skila, so they each go with their side. Amar lahem Rabbi Shimon. He tries to prove why he thinks that streifa is more chamura. Ilu lo hayta streifa chamura lo nitna lebakohen shezinta. Right? If streifa wasn't the most severe, we wouldn't have given it to the bakohen. Like if you use this bakohen that goes sleeps with some other man, commits adultery, that's the worst of the worst, and therefore it must be streifa as the most severe. Amrulo. They said to him, what do you mean? What do you mean? The worst is the megadef and the oved of avodah zarah, and therefore skila must be the worst. Okay, we had this discussion earlier. Now we say, okay, ne'aragim benechnakim, same thing. What if those two? Those are again things that Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis disagree. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Saif, Chachamim omrim bechenek. Okay, because again, Rabbi Shimon thinks Saif is the least severe, and Chachamim think chenek, strangulation. Okay, now we get to the Gemara. We try to figure out who are these achirim. Man achirim. Ilema, remember, the Rotzeach got mixed up, the murderer got mixed up with others. And then we say the rabbi said they're all exempt. In other words, even though one of them is a murderer, they go off scot-free. And the other one says Rabbi Yehuda says you put them in a kippah, seemingly they all die. So the Gemara asks, Ilem achirim ksherim, if you think the others are ksherim, they're fine people, they didn't do any commit murder, pshita, obviously, Rabbanit are going to say they're all exempt. Majority rules, right? We're going to end up saying we're not going to kill people because there's one who's a murderer. Vitu, and furthermore, if you're going to say they're all ksherim, there's a much bigger question. Baha lema Rabbi Yehuda konsim otam lekippah. It wouldn't make any sense that we're going to put them all in this small space to let them die. So, right, we basically call this death by grama, right? Like an indirect death. And yes, very hard to talk about this these days, this concept. Okay, so now we have a siman for the three answers we're going to have. I'm a Rabbi Yavahu Amar Shmuel. Hacha berotzech shelo nigmar dino, shenitarev berotzchim achirim, shenigmar dinan askinan. So what do we have here? Murderer with murderers. What's the difference between them? We have to have something different, because if they were all murderers, then we just go by the lighter punishment. It's one murderer who they haven't yet given the verdict, mixed up with a lot of other murderers who already have a death verdict. So now what's the issue? So now we have to explain the two opinions. Rabbanan savre ein gomrim dino shel adam ela befanav. You can't issue a verdict unless the person's in front of you. Now the person can't be in front of you because we need to have the person knowing this is the person, and we don't know anymore who's the person. Hilkach kulam ptulim, and therefore, crazy, we let all these murderers go off scot-free. Rabbi Yehuda, miftirinu lagamri namilo, kevan derives. What, we're going to allow murderers to be on the street? It's a huge hazard to society. Hilkach konsimotam lekippah. Therefore, we put them in this kippah, and we leave them all to die on their own. We can't actually issue the murder, right, the murder by the court, but we can do it in this alternative manner. Okay? And that resolves our issue of killing these murderers, and it doesn't bother him that there's no Gemara. You have to assume already witnesses came. If there were no witnesses, then we're not going to allow this to happen. But the witnesses came, they just didn't issue the verdict. That's option number one. Rish Lakish doesn't like this idea that we're killing someone without Gemara, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Rish Lakish says, if it's a person, for sure the person's exempt. Everyone thinks that until there's a judgment, people are innocent, and if one of them is innocent, you can't kill any of them. Now we say, oh, this wasn't people, okay? Hard to understand this, but a rotzeach is a shor, is an ox that killed. And what's the machloket? Remember, we just compared the shor to the adam, because it says shor is supposed to get killed if a shor kills, and also the baalim are supposed to get killed, the owner, but we exempt the baalim if they want, they can pay their way out, but we have this comparison. So the machloket is this, Rabbanan savrei kimitat baalim kach mitat tashor. So again, one shor was not yet convicted. All the other oxen were convicted, and we now have one that mixes up with the others. So if you say kimitat baalim kach mitat tashor, we compare them completely. Then you would say, well, then you can't issue a verdict for an ox without the ox. And here we don't have the ox because we don't know which one. Therefore, all the ox go free. And that already lessens a little our feeling about this kippah. Still, we're killing animals, but again, most of these animals were killed people and they're hazard to society. The other one also, we just haven't convicted the ox. We don't have a final judgment. We leave them all in the kippah until they die. That's option number two. Tomorrow we're going to see the problem with these options and Rav's explanation for what option number three is. So we finished for today. We'll just review our daf. We started off with this whole kavanah, how much intent is needed, how direct, and what kind of direct intention needs to happen. We had all different cases in the Mishnah. We got into Rabbi Shimon, who says you actually have to intend to kill this particular person. How far does he take that? Very far. But he does, right? Where does he get it from? Which pasuk? And what the rabbis learned from that pasuk? From there, we got to kol kavua kamech samech tadami and laws of rov. Then we got back to saying that Rabbi Shimon, though, does require a payment. And that differed from Chizkia, who didn't require any payment at all. Okay, so we had three opinions in the end. You intend to kill one person, you kill someone else, death penalty, monetary payment, or perhaps nothing at all. And then we got to this issue of a rotzeach shentarei b'achirim, and we started with two interpretations of what the case is and what the basis to the machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis is, and we'll continue with that tomorrow. wishing everyone a good day and shishma b'sorot tovot. And yeah, these sugyot are not easy to be discussing in times like this. I would tend to agree.